Do you remember when Apple used to make mini phones? Because they don't anymore. The iPhone SE, gone. The Zenfone 10, gone. The mini phone was already a rare breed, but slowly we killed it off. But something weird is happening. Out of nowhere, we're seeing a new wave of mini phones, and they are better than before. So what changed? Did we finally fix the biggest issue with mini phones? And is the dream of a mini phone finally coming back? So, why would you want a small phone in the first place? You see, most phones nowadays are 6.7 inches, which for an average person feels like holding a slab in your hand. And sure, most people gravitate towards bigger screens because it makes browsing and watching videos more enjoyable. However, holding a brick in your hand isn't the most comfortable thing. So obviously, the solution to that would be to use a smaller phone. You see, the problem is, by default, manufacturers don't make smaller phones because they're not as popular. The OnePlus 13, 6.8 inches, Nothing 3A Pro, 6.7 inches, S25 Ultra, 6.9 inches. They are huge, including the budget phones. So of course, this creates a gap in the market for those who prefer not to carry half a TV in their pocket. Apple has already tried this with the 12 mini and the 13 mini. The obvious disadvantage is that you get less battery life. The 12 mini had a good 15 to 20% less battery life than the original 12. But then the next year they juiced up the battery so much that the 13 mini had better battery than the regular 12. However, this wasn't good enough and Apple discontinued all the mini models. It's not like the phones were bad, in fact the reviews were really good. They were a good $100 cheaper than the base model and people who actually bought them really enjoyed them. But that's the problem, although they were good, not enough people were buying them. For most people, apart from the performance, the number one most important thing in a phone is battery life, and sacrificing that for a more comfortable hold just wasn't worth it, which is why Apple replaced the mini models with the Plus models, which is the complete opposite approach. Its specialty was size, which is not my specialty. But it wasn't just Apple, because Asus was also one of the last manufacturers that actually cared about mini phones. The Zenfone 10 had a 5.9 inch screen, which was tiny compared to all the other phones. And despite the size, it was still a good phone. It still had a 4300 mAh battery, which was a lot bigger than the S23's 3900 mAh battery, even though that phone was 6.1 inches. At such a small size, all the components are fighting for life because there's simply not enough space for everything, especially the battery and the camera sensors. If you wanted the best of the best, the Ultra model, there's no way that a phone could be tiny. The Zenfone 10 did a good job, but it wasn't enough because next year it was replaced by the Zenfone 11 Ultra. That phone was 6.7 inches and although it had good specs, it was uninspiring and unremarkable. And so the niche was wiped out in one swoop. Rest in peace, Zenfone 10. But just as we thought that this was the end, the mini phones have just made a comeback. Let me introduce you to the Vivo X200 Pro Mini, because I think they just cracked the code. The original X200 Pro is 6.7 inches and the mini model is 6.3 inches. Now, I understand it's technically not a mini model, and if you think about it, it's not even a small phone. But by today's standards, it's much more manageable than the mammoth Ultra models. There's still a loyal group of people that the Zenfone 10 has abandoned, which Vivo could win back if they do it right. And what makes this phone special is despite the fact that it's a mini phone, it doesn't offer any less. Of course, it's not exactly the same as the base model, but thanks to the silicon carbon battery, the capacity is now 5700 milliamps, which by numbers alone completely obliterates the 5000 milliamps on the S25 Ultra. The huge main sensor is also the same on both phones, and although it's not a 1-inch sensor like the last year's X100 Ultra, it's still just as good while being slightly smaller, which means that they could fit the same sensor on the mini model. And okay, that huge 3.7x zoom lens now turns into a 3x zoom lens with a slightly smaller sensor, but it's still bigger than the S25 Ultra's 3x zoom. And apart from that, the phone is basically identical. So you're still getting the same processor, the same screen, and almost the same camera in a much smaller and lighter footprint. How amazing is that? We no longer have the limitations that we used to have with the mini models, which means if you want to buy a smaller phone, you can, and you won't be punished for it. And this time around, it's a Pro Mini, so it still feels like you're getting the best of the best. And a similar thing happened to Xiaomi phones because their base models are technically mini models because they're 6.3 inches. But the Xiaomi 14 didn't have the best battery life because again, it was a small phone. But the Xiaomi 15 went from 4600 milliamps to 5200. And if you check GSM Arena, just look at the battery life difference. That's like 20% more battery. And again, that's thanks to the new silicon carbon battery and the new processor, the Snapdragon 8 Elite, which is very efficient. It also has the Xiaomi Ice Loop system. It does get hotter than the other phones. I suspect that it has a higher temperature limit before throttling because it also has higher benchmark scores. And despite the temperatures, the battery life is also better than the competition. So unless you stress test this phone every day, I think that's a big dub for Xiaomi. But we're not done just yet. The OnePlus 13, which is one of the best Android phones to come out this year, might be getting a mini model or a compact model under the name OnePlus 13T. It's rumored to have a 6.3-inch screen, the same Snapdragon 8 Elite, dual cameras, and hopefully a smaller price tag. Oppo is also going the same route because apparently we're gonna get the Find X8 Mini, which is also rumored to have 6.3 inches. Okay, what's going on? Did the companies just make some kind of a pact where they're all gonna have the same screen size or something? But unlike the 13T, the Oppo Mini is gonna have a periscope 3x zoom camera. And because of the much better battery technology and efficiency, we have just unlocked new capabilities. Because instead of making the phones smaller, we have also unlocked the ability to make them thinner, if we wanted to. As of right now, Samsung is not using the silicon carbon battery, but they must have figured out something else, because soon they're going to be releasing the S25 Edge, which is supposed to be around 5.8 millimeters and 162 grams, when the base S25 is 7.2 millimeters and 162 grams, which is already thin for a phone because something like the S25 Ultra is 8.2 millimeters and my OnePlus 12 is 9.2 millimeters. This new phone is gonna be almost half the thickness of my phone. And here's the thing, because both S25 models weigh the same, I suspect what they've done is basically flattened the phone so that it's the same battery capacity but it's simply larger at 6.7 inches. And I'm guessing they're going to be using the efficiency of the processor to make up for the battery, because at 6.7 inches you would expect more than 4000 milliamps, which, if I think about it now, looks really bad compared to the Vivo X200 Pro Mini. Apple is also doing the same thing because they're rumored to have the iPhone 17 Air, which is going to be around 5.5 millimeters, apparently even thinner than the S25 Edge. Straight away, the first alarm going off in my head, apart from all the voices, is durability. Remember the S6 Plus that broke like a biscuit? Well, in comparison, that phone is still fat compared to the Air model. So I don't know what kind of shenanigans Apple will pull off to prevent that. The second alarm is, how are they going to convince people to buy the phone when the battery isn't as good as the Plus or the Ultra models? But buying a bigger phone implies getting a bigger battery, so does that mean people will value a thin design over a bigger battery? Or are they hoping that people won't notice that these phones have less battery than the Pro and the Ultra models? Anyway, I love that phone companies are finally trying something new again. Just because the previous mini models flopped, they're not gonna give up, and we're not gonna be stuck with the same phones with the same thickness and weight every single year. Although the word mini has been redefined and the phones are not as small as you'd expect them to be, it still gives people choice without punishing them with inferior battery lives. Goodbye.